Elias Thorne battled the raging blizzard, his traps frozen solid. He found a faint, half-buried track near his cabin door, a ghost of human passage in the swirling white. A broken whimper led his gaze, then his unsteady steps, to two figures huddled in the snow. They would be lost if he did not act. Elias stumbled forward, the snow blinding him even at close range. He saw a young woman, her face pale, and a child, small and still, cradled in her arms. The child's head was matted with blood, a gash visible even beneath the frost. Elias felt a familiar chill, not from the wind, but from a memory of loss, a pain he had buried deep like a winter seed. He thought of turning away, of the solitude he had carved out for himself after his own family was gone, a silence he had come to depend on. His life here was a lonely peace, a hard-won quiet. He knew the cost of caring. The woman stirred, a faint gasp escaping her lips. Elias saw her eyes flutter, a desperate plea in their depths. The child, Silas, coughed, a wet, rattling sound that broke through the blizzard's roar. Elias could not leave them. His hands, calloused and strong, moved without conscious thought. He hooked his arms beneath the woman, Elara, and the boy, feeling their unnatural cold. He knew what it meant to be left to the mercy of the elements. He dragged them through the waist-deep snow, his back screaming, his legs burning with effort. The wind tried to tear them both away, but Elias held on, pulling them towards the faint glow of his cabin. Elias kicked the cabin door shut against the howling dark, letting the burden of Elara and Silas fall gently near the hearth. The sudden warmth of the cabin felt like a shock after the blizzard's fury. He knelt beside them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias looked at Silas, the boy's small chest rising and falling barely perceptible. The wound on Silas's head was jagged, deep, and still weeping slowly. Elias knew this was beyond a simple bandage. Elara stirred again, her eyes opening, wide and glazed. She tried to speak, her voice a dry rasp. Elias offered her a cup of snow he melted over the fire, holding it to her lips. She drank slowly, her gaze never leaving Silas. She whispered about a raid, her voice fragmented and distant. She spoke of their small mining claim, of men with guns, and then a name, Jeb Stone. Elias's face remained impassive, but he listened, taking in her fear and the raw tale of their terror. He began to unbutton Silas's thin, ice-stiff coat, his movements precise and practiced. He had seen injuries like this before, but rarely on someone so small. He gathered his crude medical supplies, a few herbs, clean strips of cloth, and his sharp hunting knife. He would need a steady hand and a courage he had not called upon in a long time. The night deepened, the blizzard still raged, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm unfolded. Elias laid Silas on a cleared section of the rough-hewn table, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the boy's pale face. He explained to Elara, his voice low and gruff, that there were bone fragments lodged near Silas's skull. They had to come out. Elara, though weak and trembling, nodded, her eyes fixed on her brother. Elias heated his hunting knife over the crackling flames until the blade glowed a dull red. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and anticipation. He told Elara to hold Silas steady, to keep him from thrashing. Her hands, still clumsy with cold, gripped her brother's shoulders. Elias took a deep, steadying breath. His own hands, usually so skilled with a rifle or a trap, felt heavy. He remembered a time long ago, another child, another moment of desperate hope that had ended in sorrow. He pushed the memory down, focusing on the task. The wound on Silas's head gaped, angry and red. He pressed the heated knife against the boy's scalp, and Silas screamed, a guttural sound that tore through the cabin's quiet, even in his unconscious state. Elara whimpered, tears streaming down her face, but she held on, her grip unwavering. Blood welled, a stark crimson against the white bandages. Elias's vision blurred, but his hand stayed steady. He had tended to wounded animals, sewn up his own gashes, and once, long ago, he had delivered a calf in a similar storm. This was just meat and bone, just another small body fighting to stay alive. With a wet, scraping sound, a tiny fragment of bone came free. He dropped it into a metal cup. Then he cleaned the wound again, his movements precise, and stitched it closed with strong sinew thread, meant for repairing his leather traps. This is a moment when a careful heart chooses patience over fear. Silas's breathing, though still shallow, had found a steadier rhythm. He lay unconscious, but the rattling sound was gone. Elias cleaned his hands and sat by the fire, watching the boy. Elara, exhausted, sagged against the wall, her gaze never leaving Silas. The blizzard outside still howled, but its sound now seemed distant, muffled by the cabin's thick logs. Elara began to speak again, her voice hushed, fragile. She recounted bits of their family's mining claim, a small vein of silver they had found a few seasons back. It was not much, but enough to hold hope. Then Jeb Stone came, with his men and his threats. He wanted their claim, saying their papers were false. Her parents refused to sell, refusing to be driven off their land. There had been a struggle, a raid. Her voice trembled. Her parents had hidden her and Silas in a root cellar, telling them to run if they did not return. She had waited, then fled into the snow carrying Silas, heading vaguely towards the mountains, hoping to outrun the men. She did not know how long they had been wandering. Elias listened, his face a mask, but his hand unconsciously went to his pocket. He felt the smooth, cool wood of a small carved eagle, a symbol he had carried for years. A quiet grief stirred within him, a familiar ache for a past that was also stolen, though in a different way. He asked Elara where their claim was located, the name of the river valley. When she spoke the name, a cold knot tightened in Elias Thorne's gut. The river she named was the very same place where his own family had been taken from him years ago. He now understood that their paths were tied by more than just this blizzard. He realized that this shared geography connected their separate pains. The next 3 days passed in a blur of tending and waiting. Elias tirelessly watched over Silas, changing the boy's bandages, brewing herbal teas to reduce his fever, and keeping the cabin warm. He moved with a quiet dedication, his gruff exterior slowly softening under the pressure of care. Elara, though still weak, did what she could. She kept the fire stoked, melted snow for water, and spoke in soft tones to her unconscious brother. She watched Elias, observing his silent strength and the unexpected gentleness in his large hands as he smoothed the damp cloth over Silas's forehead. The shared ordeal, the relentless focus on keeping Silas alive, began to chip away at Elias's practiced isolation. He found himself answering Elara's quiet questions with more than just grunts, offering small pieces of his mountain knowledge. A faint, unspoken bond began to form between the man who had sought solitude and the woman who had lost everything. The cabin, once a haven of Elias Thorne's solitary peace, now held a fragile new rhythm, a quiet hope. Elias knew the blizzard would pass, but the lives he had saved would remain, forever altering the quiet world he had built for himself. The morning light, thin and pale, finally pierced the cabin window, chasing away the long shadows of the blizzard. Elias Thorne, who had not truly slept, watched Silas advance. The small boy stirred, a faint sigh escaping his lips. Elias held his breath, his calloused hand hovering near Silas's forehead, checking for fever. The warmth had receded a little more. Then slowly Silas's eyelids fluttered open. His eyes, a soft hazel, blinked, confused and weak. But they were open. Elias felt a sudden, unfamiliar catch in his chest, a flicker of something he had long thought extinguished. Elara Vance, huddled on a bearskin nearby, gasped. She pushed herself up, her own face pale with exhaustion, and scrambled to Silas's side. She knelt, her hand trembling as she touched her brother's cheek. A soft sob escaped her, and then another as tears streamed down her face. She looked up at Elias Thorne, her eyes shining with profound relief. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around his forearm, clinging to him in a moment of raw, shared vulnerability. Elias felt the warmth of her touch, a small fire against his skin, and the hard protective shell he wore around his heart cracked just a fraction. Silas, with a faint whisper, asked for water. His voice was thin as creek ice, but it was there, a sound of life returning. Elara Vance wept with relief, offering heartfelt thanks to Elias. Elias, his own voice rough from disuse and the weight of the last 3 days, offered quiet reassurance. He fetched a cup of water, holding it carefully to Silas's lips, watching the boy sip slowly. The fear that had tightened Elias Thorne's muscles for days began to loosen, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. Elias felt a profound shift within him, a recognition that this small boy, this vulnerable sister, had brought a spark back into his solitary world. Later that morning, as the weak spring sun struggled to warm the cabin, Elias Thorne sharpened his hunting knife by the hearth. The rhythmic scrape of steel against stone was the only sound for a long moment. Elara Vance, visibly stronger, moved about the small space, arranging the few blankets, her gaze often falling on Elias. She paused at last, her voice soft but direct, asking why he had helped them. She noted his solitude, the way the cabin felt lived in but empty, like a story half told. Elias Thorne did not look up from his task. He replied with a simple truth, a phrase he had lived by in the vast, indifferent wilderness. He told her that a body in the snow, barely breathing, was a living thing. He said he did not leave living things to die in the cold. It was a matter of principle, a mountain man's code, even if it had long been buried beneath his own grief and isolation. Elara watched him, a quiet understanding dawning in her eyes. Elias realized his supplies, carefully hoarded for the long winter, would soon run low. 3 mouths to feed, 3 bodies to keep warm, meant a swift depletion of his stores. The thought brought a familiar knot of worry to his stomach. He had enough furs to trade, enough skill to hunt, but the balance of his survival had shifted dramatically. He knew he could not maintain this new arrangement for long without a trip to the nearest settlement. Elias Thorne understood the harsh arithmetic of the mountains, and this new burden of life, while welcome, presented new challenges. That evening, with Silas Vance finally sleeping a more natural sleep by the fire, Elara Vance spoke of her past. She talked about her parents, their small mining claim nestled in a forgotten valley, and the relentless pressure from a man named Jeb Stone. Her voice was hushed, tinged with a deep, lingering fear. She described how Jeb Stone and his men had first offered to buy them out, then threatened, and finally driven them from their land. She spoke of a particular river valley, a winding stretch of water known for its clear trout and hidden veins of gold. Elias Thorne listened, his gaze fixed on the flickering firelight, but his mind traveled far away. The river valley Elara Vance described was a place he knew well, a place etched into his own memory with the sharp, cold pain of loss. It was the same valley where, long ago, his own life had shattered. The wooden eagle, smooth and cool, felt heavy in his pocket, a quiet reminder of his lost wife and son. Memories stirred, unwelcome and sharp, like shards of ice in a thawing stream. This is a moment when a careful heart chooses patience over fear. Elara Vance continued, her story a stark echo of the wilderness's cruelty and mankind's greed. Elias grew quiet, the weight of her words settling in his heart. He felt a connection forming, not just from the shared ordeal of the blizzard, but from a deeper, unspoken understanding of loss and injustice. He kept his own past locked away, a habit learned through years of solitude, but Elara Vance's tale had unknowingly touched an old wound. The next morning, a thin layer of fresh snow covered the ground, but the air felt crisper, less oppressive. Elias Thorne prepared to check his traps, a vital task for their continued survival. He gave Elara Vance terse, practical instructions on how to maintain the fire, how to prepare the simple gruel for Silas, and how to keep the cabin warm. His words were few, but his meaning was clear, a quiet demonstration of his trust in her. Elara Vance, determined not to be a burden, listened carefully. She moved with a newfound purpose, her hands competent as she tended the fire, her eyes sharp as she watched Silas. She showed a quiet resilience, a natural aptitude for the demanding life of the mountains. Elias Thorne, before he left, saw the cabin already warming, the scent of pine smoke rising from the chimney. He felt a brief, almost imperceptible nod of approval within himself. Upon his return, several hours later, Elias Thorne found the cabin warm and tidy. A small pot of broth simmered on the hearth, and Silas Vance, though still pale, was resting peacefully, a clean cloth on his forehead. Elara Vance looked up, a small, tired smile on her face. It was a silent affirmation of trust, a practical step in the long, arduous journey of forming a new bond. Elias Thorne felt a quiet respect for Elara Vance, recognizing her strength and her will to survive. Later that afternoon, as the cabin settled into a comfortable quiet, Elias Thorne took out a piece of dried pine. He began to carve with his hunting knife, his large hands surprisingly deft and precise. Silas Vance, still weak, watched from his bed near the fire, his hazel eyes wide with fascination. Elias usually carved simple tools or repairs, but today he felt an urge for something more. He shaped the wood into a small, crouching rabbit, its ears alert. Elias Thorne, usually grim and focused, offered the carving to Silas Vance. He pushed it gently into the boy's small, thin hand. Silas held the wooden rabbit, turning it over and over, a spark of wonder in his eyes. Then a small, hopeful smile, fragile as new ice, touched his lips. It was the first genuine smile Elias had seen from the boy, a silent testament to a spirit slowly mending. Elara Vance, observing from across the cabin, saw the profound impact this simple moment had on Elias Thorne. She watched his stern features soften, a thawing of his protective shell, a crack in the emotional wall he had built around himself for so long. It was a tender, heartwarming sight, a glimpse of the man Elias Thorne might once have been, or perhaps the man he could be again. Silas Vance's small smile was a powerful, innocent catalyst for Elias's change, a tiny beacon of hope in the mountain man's heart. That night, after Silas Vance had drifted into a deeper, more peaceful sleep, Elias Thorne and Elara Vance sat by the dwindling firelight. The topic of their immediate future hung heavy in the air between them. Elias admitted he needed to go to the nearest settlement. Silas Vance needed more robust medical supplies, stronger salves to ensure his wound healed without infection. And all three of them needed more food, flour, salt, and other staples that the mountain could not provide. Elara Vance expressed her fear of the outside world. She spoke of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of Elias Thorne's cabin, especially the reach of Jeb Stone and his men. The thought of leaving the sanctuary of the wilderness, even for a short time, brought a fresh wave of apprehension to her face. Elias Thorne saw her worry, the tension in her shoulders. Elias Thorne, his gaze steady and unwavering, looked at Elara Vance. He promised to protect them. It was not a casual statement, but a profound commitment from a man who had once only protected himself. A vow spoken in the quiet intimacy of the cabin. His hand, rough and strong, brushed hers. The impending journey to town was fraught with risk, but the choice to go was clear. He would face the dangers of the outside world for them. Stay a little longer, the stove breath grows steadier, and the truth draws nearer. Elias Thorne knew what lay ahead, a world full of judgment and peril, but he also knew he would not face it alone. Elias Thorne prepared for their departure from the small cabin, the early spring morning still holding a biting chill in the mountain air. He fashioned a makeshift travois from sturdy branches and animal hide, carefully securing Silas to it. The boy, still frail from his head wound, watched with wide, curious eyes, absorbing Elias's every move. Elias packed their meager supplies, mostly dried meat, hardtack, and a small bag of flour, knowing the journey ahead through the thawing wilderness would test their endurance. Elara Vance stood by, her face etched with a mix of fear and grim determination, her gaze fixed on the uncertain path ahead. She held Elias's arm, seeking balance on the treacherous ground where melting snow created slick mud and hidden ice patches beneath the sparse pine needles. Elias felt the familiar weight of responsibility, heavier now with two lives depending on his every step and decision. The mountain, usually a source of comfort in its solitude, now felt like a labyrinth of unseen dangers. He secured the small, carved wooden eagle to the side of the travois, its smooth, familiar wood a quiet comfort in his hand. Once a symbol of his own fractured past and profound loss, it now represented a fragile hope, a silent prayer for their uncertain future. The path wound downwards, a challenging descent through dense pine forest, where the boughs hung heavy with dripping snow. The wind, though milder than the blizzard they had endured, still whistled through the peaks, reminding them of the wilderness's constant, indifferent power. Elias knew the mountain could offer no mercy, only challenges, and he had to be ready for each one. He looked back at the small cabin, its chimney now cold, a chapter closed behind them. Their survival lay in moving forward, step by arduous step, into the unknown. Later that morning, deep within a dense forest along the winding trail, Elias Thorne paused. His experienced eyes spotted fresh deer tracks, a welcome sign of sustenance in the often unforgiving wild. His hunter's instinct, honed over years of solitude and harsh living, took over. He moved silently, his rifle steady in his hands, and soon brought down a young deer with a single, precise shot. It was a clean kill, an efficient act of survival that Elara and Silas watched with a mix of awe and grim understanding. Life in the wilderness demanded such acts. Elias expertly butchered the animal, his movements precise and economical, wasting nothing. Elara, proving her own unexpected competence and resilience, helped prepare the meal by a small, hidden fire. She cleaned the meat, tended the flames, and asked quiet questions about the best way to cook it over the open coals, her resourcefulness impressing Elias. Silas, though still weak from his injury, watched with wide-eyed fascination. He absorbed Elias's silent lessons, the harsh realities of the wild becoming a part of his young world. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows around them, creating a small, warm circle of temporary peace. The shared meal, simple and robust, created a fleeting moment of quiet communion, forged from necessity and shared effort. Elias felt a faint loosening in his chest, a sense of belonging he had not known for a long time, a feeling stronger than the chill of the forest air. This was a different kind of strength, he realized, one found not in solitude, but in shared purpose, in the silent understanding that grew between them. The forest, for a brief time, felt less like a threat and more like a provider. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, Elias Thorne led them to the outskirts of Willow Creek. The small frontier settlement appeared in the distance, a cluster of rough-hewn buildings against the stark mountain backdrop. Elias's eyes, ever watchful, scanned the ground. He spotted fresh tracks near the settlement, broader and deeper than those left by wilderness creatures. These were the tracks of multiple horses and men, and a chilling familiarity settled in his gut. He knew these boot prints. They belonged to Jeb Stone's men. Elara tensed beside him, her hand instinctively reaching for Silas on the travois. Her face paled, recognizing the immediate danger. She whispered Jeb's name, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the town. Elias's grip tightened on his rifle. He made the decision to approach cautiously, his senses sharpened, preparing for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. The faint scent of wood smoke and human activity mingled with the cold mountain air, a deceptive promise of safety that Elias did not trust. Elias Thorne guided the travois through the main street of Willow Creek, Elara walking closely behind, shielding Silas with her body. The general store was their first stop, its doors wide open to the dusty street. As they entered, the chatter inside abruptly ceased. Every eye in the crowded store turned toward them, a collective gaze that felt like a physical weight. Mr. Abernathy, the store owner, a man with a pinched face and beady eyes, eyed Elias with open suspicion. He moved slowly from behind his counter, his voice clipped and unwelcoming. He said he would not extend them credit. He claimed their kind had a habit of disappearing without paying their debts. Elias, accustomed to such judgment, remained stoic. Elara, however, flinched, her hopes for a warm welcome dissolving. Whispers started to ripple through the townspeople, loud enough to be heard clearly. A woman muttered about Elara's family, suggesting they were the kind who brought trouble to a decent town. Another spoke of the young woman's father and his dubious dealings. Others cast dark glances at Elias, calling him a wild mountain man who kept to himself for reasons best left unsaid. The air grew thick with unspoken accusations and veiled insults. Elias felt the familiar sting of ostracization, the same coldness he had faced for years. Even in the bright light of day, shadows can hold the coldest truths. Mr. Abernathy pushed a small bag of salt across the counter, saying that all Elias could buy with the few coins he offered, implying they were a burden. It was clear the town had already passed its judgment, not on the people before them, but on a story it had decided to believe. This community was not a sanctuary, but another wall to overcome. This judgment solidified Elias's resolve. He knew he could not rely on the kindness of strangers here, only on his own strength. Their next steps would require cunning and fortitude, not please. After the disheartening encounter at the general store, Elias Thorne made his way to Dr. Caldwell's office. The small building, located on a quieter side street, smelled distinctly of antiseptic and old wood, a stark contrast to the fresh mountain air in the bustling street they had just left. Dr. Caldwell, a portly man with tired eyes and a perpetually furrowed brow, looked up from his ledger as Elias entered. He regarded Elias with the same wary suspicion as Mr. Abernathy, his gaze sweeping over Elias's rough clothes and the two vulnerable figures behind him. He asked Elias what business he had there, his voice gruff and dismissive, already expecting trouble. Elias explained Silas's severe head wound and the urgent need for proper medicine and bandages to prevent infection. Dr. Caldwell, seeing Elias's weathered appearance and the simple, worn clothes of Elara and Silas, initially refused to treat the boy. He claimed he had no time for drifters and their ailments, stating he had paying patients to attend to. He suggested Elias take the boy to the charity ward if he had no visible means to pay for his services. Elias, with a quiet resolve that brooked no argument, reached into his pouch. He laid out a small pile of valuable furs on the doctor's desk, prime beaver and fox pelts, representing a season's worth of careful trapping and arduous work. His gaze, steady and unwavering, met Dr. Caldwell's. Elias stated that the boy needed care, and he expected the doctor to provide it without further delay. Dr. Caldwell's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the furs, a clear sign of unexpected wealth and serious intent. The doctor, impressed by Elias's quiet determination and the undeniable value of the payment, reluctantly agreed to examine Silas. He muttered about the inconvenience and the unusual nature of their arrival, but his hands, though rough and calloused, were surprisingly gentle as he began to unwrap the boy's makeshift bandages. Elara watched, her silent pleading giving way to a cautious, fragile hope. Elias knew the sacrifice of the furs would make their coming winter much harder, but Silas's life, he decided, was worth any price, no matter the personal cost. That evening, Elias Thorne left Elara and Silas in a secluded spot near the creek, a small fire warming them, while he ventured into a saloon in Willow Creek. He sought information, needing to understand the forces at play in this hostile town. The saloon was dimly lit, filled with the stench of cheap whiskey and unwashed men. Elias sat in a dark corner, nursing a single drink, his ears open. He overheard hushed rumors about Jeb Stone, a man known for his ruthless land dealings and his ability to intimidate anyone who stood in his way. They spoke of seized claims and families driven out. Suddenly, the saloon doors swung open and Jeb Stone himself strode in. He was a powerfully built man, his face scarred, his eyes cold and arrogant. Two of his heavily armed men followed, their presence a silent threat. Jeb commanded the room with his swagger, his voice loud and boastful. He spoke of a certain mining claim and some troublesome squatters who thought they could defy him. Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. Jeb's description of the squatters was unmistakable, matching Elara and her family perfectly. Jeb then made a thinly veiled threat against anyone foolish enough to help his claim jumpers. He said they would face consequences far worse than any blizzard. Elias watched him, his gaze intense, understanding the true depth of the danger they now faced. This was not just a greedy man, but a predator with power. Jeb Stone's arrogance was a mask, Elias realized, hiding a deep-seated cruelty that promised nothing but ruin for those who opposed him. Elias knew then that he would have to fight this man, not just for land, but for their very lives. Returning from the saloon with a clearer, grimmer understanding of their adversary, Elias Thorne found a dilapidated lean-to on the far edge of Willow Creek. It was mostly hidden from view by a stand of scraggly cottonwoods, offering a temporary, albeit meager, shelter from the chill night air and prying eyes. He brought Elara and Silas there, ensuring they were as safe as possible outside the watchful, judgmental gaze of the town. Elara huddled close to Silas, her fear of Jeb Stone and the town's unkindness palpable in the tense silence. She whispered about their desperation, about the long journey they had endured, and the terrifying prospect of facing Stone again. Her voice trembled, betraying the exhaustion and fear she had tried to suppress. Elias sat beside her, his quiet presence a solid comfort in the encroaching darkness. He reassured her, telling her he would not let Stone or anyone else harm them, his words low and steady. He reaffirmed his commitment to their safety, his hand gently brushing hers in the dark, a silent promise more profound than any spoken vow. Elias knew the lean-to was only a temporary reprieve, a fragile bubble of safety in a hostile world. But for now, it was a small bastion of hope. He would remain vigilant through the long night, a silent guardian in the growing darkness, watching for any sign of danger. The cold ground beneath them and the stars above them were their only witnesses to this new, unspoken bond. Dawn broke cold and clear over Willow Creek. Just as Elias Thorne was stirring the embers of their small fire, Sheriff Brody appeared. The sheriff, a stern man with a heavy badge, stood silhouetted against the rising sun, his presence immediately commanding attention. He had found their lean-to despite Elias's efforts to conceal it. Sheriff Brody's voice was firm, official. He warned Elias about harboring suspicious individuals, noting the town's disapproval of Elara's family and a wild mountain man living outside the law. He made it clear that their presence was unwelcome and could cause trouble for everyone. Elias met his gaze, his own expression unreadable. Then Brody's voice softened almost imperceptibly. He mentioned Jeb Stone, not directly accusing him, but hinting that Stone was a problem for the town, a man who pushed boundaries and caused unrest. Brody's eyes held a flicker of unease, a silent acknowledgement that not everything in Willow Creek was as orderly as his badge suggested. A watchful heart can find light even in the grayest morning. It was a subtle admission, a crack in the facade of official neutrality. Elias understood that Brody, while bound by his office and perhaps by fear, was not entirely aligned with Stone. This implicit confession revealed a path forward, a potential ally in an unexpected place, though the sheriff remained overtly cautious. Elias realized that the layers of power and corruption in Willow Creek ran deeper than he first imagined, and some alliances might form in the shadows. Dr. Caldwell was a man built of rough edges and sharp words, but his hands moved with surprising gentleness as he examined Silas. Elias Thorne watched from the corner of the small, cramped office. Caldwell cleaned the boy's head wound, replacing the crude mountain dressings with fresh bandages and applying a poultice of herbs that smelled faintly of pine and antiseptic. Silas whimpered softly, but his eyes, though still wide with a child's fear, held a clearer light than they had in days. Caldwell spoke mostly in grunts, instructing Elara Vance on how to administer the bitter-smelling draft he poured into a small vial. Elias felt a profound relief uncoil in his chest, a tension he had not realized he carried so tightly. He reached into his pouch, pulling out the last of the prime furs he had trapped before the blizzard. The stack was smaller than he would have liked. He had traded well to get this far. Now a substantial portion of his winter's earnings, his very means of survival, passed into Caldwell's waiting hand. Elias understood the cost. Less meat for himself, fewer supplies to last until spring's full bounty. The thought pricked at him, a familiar echo of sacrifice, but the sight of Silas, breathing easier, his small face less pale, quieted the old mountain man's doubts. Elias knew this was the only choice he could make. Elara Vance looked at Elias, her eyes brimming with a gratitude that needed no words. She reached out, her hand resting briefly on his arm, a soft, warm touch that surprised him. Elias met her gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He simply nodded, his relief mirrored in her face, their shared burden a little lighter now that Silas had received a healer's touch. The doctor, finished with his work, grumbled something about keeping the boy warm and left them to gather their things. Elias knew the immediate crisis was over, but a new, more subtle tension had taken its place. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lean-to as Elias Thorne returned from checking the few traps he had managed to set around the outskirts of Willow Creek. The traps were empty, a grim reminder of their dwindling resources. He found Elara Vance stirring a meager pot of stew over a small, carefully contained fire. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tied back, but there was a new glint in her eyes, a quiet determination Elias had not seen before. She held out a small, roughly tied sack. "I found some work," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Mending for Mrs. Peterson, and help Mr. Abernathy sweep his store. He paid me this." She opened the sack, revealing a few tarnished coins in a small measure of flour. It was not much, but it was enough to stretch their thin rations for another day or two. Elias looked at the flour, then at Elara. He saw the pride in her stance, the subtle defiance against their difficult circumstances. The town's disdain for them had been palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket. Yet Elara had pushed through it. Elias simply nodded, a gruff sound of acceptance. He knew how hard it must have been for her, a young woman alone, facing the cold eyes and whispered judgments of the townsfolk. Her small contribution was more than just flour and coins. It was a testament to her spirit, a silent declaration that she would not be a burden. It was a shared burden, Elias realized, a weight that felt lighter when she carried a part of it too. He had spent years reliant only on himself, but Elara's presence was slowly, subtly shifting the landscape of his solitary life. Later that evening, after Silas Vance had drifted into a restless sleep by the dwindling fire, Elara Vance found Elias Thorne polishing the small carved wooden eagle he carried. The firelight danced across the smooth, worn wood, making the bird seem almost alive in his large hands. She watched him for a long moment, the quiet reverence Elias held for the object evident in his every movement. Elara had seen the eagle before, tied to Silas's travois, a constant companion. "That eagle," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "It means something to you, doesn't it?" Elias stiffened, his hand closing around the carving, hiding it for a moment. He was a man who guarded his past fiercely, letting no one close enough to touch the raw edges of his memories. But Elara's gentle curiosity, devoid of judgment, was different. He hesitated, then slowly reopened his hand, letting the firelight once again illuminate the small, perfect bird. Elias looked into the flames, his gaze distant. "It was carved by my wife," he said, his voice rougher than usual, a seldom used part of him speaking. "Long ago, for our son." He paused, the words heavy with a grief that had never truly left him. "They were taken by the fever, both of them. The eagle was a symbol," she said, "of freedom, of spirit. He was just a boy, small, full of life. It was to remind him that even in these mountains, he could soar." Elias's hand trembled slightly as he held the carving. "After they were gone, it became a reminder of what I lost, of the promise I could not keep." Elara listened, her heart aching for him. She understood loss, the way it carved hollows into a person's soul. She saw the depth of his solitude, the heavy silence he carried. She reached out, gently touching the wooden eagle with her fingertip, a shared understanding passing between them without further words. This was a moment when a careful heart chooses patience over fear. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to hold the weight of forgotten sorrows. The mountain man had opened a door, just a crack, into the chamber of his deepest grief. Elias Thorne felt the quiet intimacy of the moment, a connection forming in the unspoken space between them. He realized he had not spoken of his family to another soul in years. The memory was sharp, the pain still present, yet sharing it with Elara did not make it worse. It changed it, subtly, profoundly. This fragile trust, born of shared hardship, felt like a dangerous new terrain. Elias knew this path, once started, could not easily be unturned. The deep silence of the late night was abruptly shattered by the snap of a twig outside the lean-to. Elias Thorne, already on edge, rose silently, his hand instinctively going to the rifle always within reach. Elara Vance, startled awake, clutched Silas Vance closer to her chest. Three figures emerged from the shadows, illuminated by the pale moonlight and the distant, flickering lights of Willow Creek. Jeb Stone stood in the lead, his cruel smile a predatory gleam in the dim light, flanked by two of his rough-looking men. "Well, well," Jeb Stone drawled, his voice thick with menace. "Look what we have here. The little stray and her mountain man protector. Thought you'd just hide out here, did you, little girl?" He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. "Funny, I heard rumors about you, and about a certain claim, a claim that now belongs to me." Elara tensed, her eyes wide with fear, but she held her ground, shielding Silas with her body. Jeb Stone pulled a handful of coins from his pocket, jingling them temptingly. "Tell you what, you sign over those papers, that little piece of dirt your daddy thought was so valuable, and I'll give you this. Enough for a stagecoach out of here, maybe a new start somewhere else, away from my business." His eyes hardened. Or, you can stay, and things might get unpleasant. He glanced at Silas, a chilling implication in his gaze. Elias Thorne stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Elara and Jeb Stone. He did not speak, his face a mask of stone, but his hand rested firmly on the stock of his rifle. His stance alone was a challenge, a silent defiance that brooked no argument. Jeb Stone's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance, then genuine anger. He recognized the look in Elias's eyes, the quiet, dangerous resolve of a man who would face down worse than a greedy speculator. Jeb Stone's men shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their own weapons. The air crackled with unspoken threats, a tense standoff beneath the cold mountain moon. Elias Thorne knew this was no longer just about survival in the wilderness. It was a confrontation, a line drawn in the dirt. He would not let them harm Elara or Silas. The next morning, Elias Thorne walked into Sheriff Brody's cluttered office. The air smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. Brody, a man whose face was etched with the compromises of his position, looked up from a ledger, his expression wary. Elias stood before the desk, his presence filling the small room. Jeb Stone paid us a visit last night, Elias stated, his voice calm, devoid of any accusatory edge, simply relaying fact. Threatened the girl, tried to strong-arm her into signing over her family's claim. Brody sighed, pushing a hand through his thinning hair. Elias, you know how things are. Jeb Stone, he's a powerful man in this town, got a lot of connections. He leaned back in his creaking chair. And you, a mountain man, with a woman and a child, everyone says is troublesome. It's hard to just take your word. Brody's gaze shifted, avoiding Elias's steady eyes. My word is true, Elias replied, his voice still low but with an underlying current of steel. He threatened a child. He threatened Elara. You swore an oath to uphold the law, Sheriff, to protect the innocent. Elias's words were not a plea, but a direct challenge, cutting through Brody's excuses. Does your oath only apply to those the town approves of, or does it extend to those who truly need it? Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably, his eyes finally meeting Elias's. He was caught between the convenience of ignoring Jeb Stone and the stark reality of his duty. Elias Thorne saw the flicker of conscience in the sheriff's eyes, a man wrestling with his own moral compass. Brody knew Elias spoke the truth, but acting on it meant consequences, a disruption of the careful balance he maintained in Willow Creek. Elias knew the sheriff would not act yet, but a seed of doubt had been planted, a challenge to his integrity that could not easily be dismissed. That afternoon, the sun warmed the air around a small, gurgling creek on the outskirts of town. Silas Vance, his bandages smaller now, his color returning, sat beside Elias Thorne on a mossy log. Elias held a small piece of pine wood, his large, skilled hands deftly carving a squirrel, its tiny claws and bushy tail slowly taking shape. Silas watched, fascinated, his head tilted. Will you teach me? Silas asked, his voice soft, a hint of childlike eagerness in it. Teach me to make a squirrel, like you did the eagle? Elias looked at the boy, his heart stirring with an unfamiliar warmth. He remembered his own son, a lifetime ago, asking for similar lessons, his small hands eager to learn. A surge of protectiveness, of quiet joy filled Elias. He had spent years closing off that part of himself, bearing the memory of fatherhood with his grief. But Silas, with his trusting eyes and innocent request, was slowly prying it open. Elias nodded, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. Aye, Silas, I will. You'll need a good knife and patience, and to learn the wood. He handed the nearly finished squirrel to Silas, whose small fingers carefully grasped the carving. Elara Vance watched from a short distance, a gentle smile on her face. She saw the profound impact Silas had on Elias, the way the boy's simple presence chipped away at the mountain man's hardened exterior. Elias Thorne, who had once sworn off all attachments, was now offering a promise to a child, a commitment to a future he had not dared to imagine. It was a promise of shared knowledge, of time, of belonging. The sunlight filtered through the young leaves, dappling the creek bed. Elias felt a profound shift within him, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Silas's eager smile was a beacon, guiding him toward a path he had long thought lost. Later that day, Elias Thorne returned to the general store, determined to learn more about Elara Vance's family claim. Mr. Abernathy, always hovering behind his counter, looked at Elias with his usual mixture of suspicion and forced politeness. Elias tried to inquire about past land filings, asking in general terms about the procedures for prospectors' claims. Abernathy, however, seemed to relish sharing gossip more than facts. "Claim filings, you say?" Abernathy scoffed, polishing a jar. "No need to worry about the Vance claim, mountain man. That's already settled." He lowered his voice, leaning closer, as if sharing a great secret. "Jeb Stone, he filed for it a few weeks back. Said the Vances abandoned it. Right and proper, too. Nobody's going to argue with Jeb." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He saw Elara, who had followed him inside, her face draining of color. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with a fierce, burning anger. "Abandoned it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "He shot my father. He ran us off. He didn't abandon anything. He stole it." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Abernathy, realizing his blunder, tried to backtrack, mumbling about how he was just repeating what he heard. But the damage was done. Elias Thorne felt a surge of righteous indignation. This was not just about protecting Elara and Silas Vance anymore. It was about justice. Jeb Stone had not merely harassed them. He had committed an outright theft, using violence and intimidation to secure his ill-gotten gains. Elias realized the fight was no longer a personal battle for survival, but a legal and moral one, a struggle to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. He looked at Elara, her face flushed with fury, and knew this was a battle they would have to fight together. He understood now the true depth of Jeb Stone's cruelty, and the path ahead was clear, though fraught with danger. The dusty light of the general store seemed to thicken around them, the air suddenly heavy with the weight of this new shocking revelation. The fight for the Vance family's legacy had just truly begun. That night, a cold wind whistled around the lean-to, but inside a quiet fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on Elias Thorne's and Elara Vance's faces. Silas Vance slept soundly, oblivious to the grim conversation unfolding. Elias had explained the legalities, the complex and often unfair process of challenging a land claim, especially against a man like Jeb Stone. He spoke of the need for proof, for witnesses, for something more solid than their word against Jeb's. "He filed for it," Elara said, her voice still laced with anger, but now with a steely resolve. "He thought we wouldn't come back. He thought we'd just disappear." She looked at Elias, her eyes shining with determination. "We have to fight him, for my parents, for Silas, for what's right." Her fear was still there, a faint tremor in her voice, but it was overshadowed by a fierce courage Elias recognized and admired. Elias nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. Most folks are scared of Jeb. They won't want to speak against him." He took a stick and drew a rough map in the dirt floor of the lean-to, outlining the claim, the general store, the sheriff's office. "We need someone who saw what happened, someone who knew your parents' claim was legitimate, someone who isn't afraid." They discussed the few people in Willow Creek who might have known Elara's family or who might have reason to distrust Jeb Stone. Elias knew the search would be difficult, dangerous even. But looking at Elara, at her unwavering resolve, he knew they could not give up. They had a shared purpose, a common enemy, and a fragile but growing alliance that felt strong enough to face the challenges ahead. Their plan was desperate, a long shot, but it was a plan, and it united them against the encroaching darkness. Elias knew their efforts would require courage beyond anything they had shown before. Elias Thorne and Elara Vance began their quiet search across Willow Creek, their purpose cloaked in casual conversation. They walked from the general store where Mr. Abernathy continued his cold scrutiny to the blacksmith's forge, its rhythmic clang echoing their own steady purpose. Elias asked about old claims, about anyone who remembered the Vance family, about Jeb Stone and his dealings. Elara stood beside him, her gaze meeting the eyes of the townspeople they encountered. Most turned away quickly, their faces etched with a fear of Jeb Stone that Elias understood well. Others offered terse, unhelpful answers, their words like tightly shut doors. The children playing in the dusty streets fell silent when Elias and Elara passed, their mothers pulling them closer. Elias saw the sting of renewed ostracization on Elara's face, a familiar shadow in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen in his own past, the mark of those the world decided to cast out. He felt a familiar ache, but also a growing resolve. He would not let them break her spirit again. Elias moved with a quiet dignity that seemed to challenge the judgment, his presence a steady anchor for Elara. He kept his voice low, his questions direct, his gaze unwavering. He made it clear they were not begging, but seeking truth. The church, usually a place of solace, offered no comfort. The pastor's wife, a stern woman with pursed lips, simply mumbled a prayer for their souls and hurried away. Elara felt the weight of their isolation press down on her, the invisible walls of the town closing in. Each averted gaze, each hushed whisper chipped away at her fragile hope. She glanced at Elias Thorne, his profile hard and determined, and found a spark of courage within herself. He had faced down blizzards and hungry beasts, and he would not be swayed by the cold shoulders of townsfolk. This was a different kind of wilderness, a human one. But Elias Thorne navigated it with the same quiet strength. He continued to ask, to observe, to listen, even when no one offered direct help. He knew that sometimes answers came in the spaces between words, in the things people chose not to say. He understood the reluctance, the fear of reprisal from a man like Jeb Stone. He knew how easily a community could turn a blind eye to injustice when faced with a powerful bully. Yet he pushed on, driven by a deep sense of commitment to Elara and Silas Vance, a commitment that had grown into the very core of his being. Elias Thorne remembered Old Man Hemlock, a figure as weathered and solitary as the mountain itself. Hemlock was a prospector known for his stubborn honesty and his preference for the company of rocks over men. His small, ramshackle farm lay on the far outskirts of Willow Creek, tucked away in a hollow near the creek where the willows grew thick. Elias had traded furs with him once, long ago, and recalled the old man's clear, uncompromising eyes. He suggested they seek him out. Elara Vance agreed, her eyes holding a flicker of new hope. They walked for a good hour, leaving the dusty lanes of the settlement behind, the air growing cleaner with each step. Hemlock's farm was little more than a cabin and a few fenced patches, barely holding against the wilderness. Old Man Hemlock sat on his porch, whittling a piece of wood, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up as they approached, his gaze sharp, taking in Elias's lean frame and Elara's wary stance. Elias introduced them, explaining their purpose, speaking of Elara's family and the stolen claim. Hemlock listened, his face impassive, occasionally spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Elias Thorne felt a familiar kinship with the old prospector, a shared understanding of solitude and self-reliance. After a long silence, Hemlock admitted he knew the Vance family. He said he had seen Jeb Stone's men. He spoke of how they rode out to the Vance claim, not once but many times, harassing Elara's parents, trying to scare them off. He confirmed he had witnessed the threats, the intimidation, the way Jeb Stone tried to force them to sign over their land. His voice was raspy like dry leaves, but his words carried the weight of truth. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, Old Man Hemlock reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn piece of parchment, folded many times. He carefully unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn but precise, detailing the boundaries of Elara's family's original claim, dated years before Jeb Stone's fraudulent filing. Elias looked at the map, then at Elara, a profound sense of vindication washing over him. The truth was not always easy to find, but it always left its own kind of trail. This was a moment when a careful heart chose patience over fear. The map shifted the very ground beneath their feet, turning whispers into undeniable proof. Elias Thorne returned to Willow Creek alone that evening, the old map carefully tucked inside his buckskin vest. The lamplight glowed from Sheriff Brody's office, a beacon in the gathering dusk. Elias stepped inside, the scent of stale tobacco and paper filling the air. Brody sat hunched over his desk, writing. He looked up, his brow furrowed, clearly expecting more complaints about Jeb Stone. Elias laid the map on the desk, carefully smoothing its creases. He explained Old Man Hemlock's testimony, his voice calm and steady, letting the facts speak for themselves. Brody picked up the map, his fingers tracing the faint lines, then compared it to a newer, official-looking document he pulled from a drawer. His face, usually a mask of official indifference, began to show the cracks of internal struggle. He knew Jeb Stone's claim was recent, suspiciously so. The old map, dated and signed, was undeniable proof of fraud. Elias watched the sheriff, knowing this was a test of Brody's own conscience, a moment when the lawman had to choose between easy corruption and difficult justice. Elias spoke of his duty, of protecting the innocent, of the law's true purpose. Elias Thorne watched the conflict play across Brody's face, a silent appeal to the better man within the uniform. Sheriff Brody sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the whole town's unspoken compromises. He looked from the map to Elias, then back again. He admitted that the evidence was too clear to ignore. He said he could not simply turn a blind eye to such blatant fraud, especially with a witness and a dated document. He grudgingly conceded that he would have to call a town meeting. He said they would address the land claim dispute publicly. It was not a full embrace of their cause, but it was an acknowledgement of truth, a small victory in a long fight. Elias nodded, his expression unreadable. He had planted the seed of justice, and now it was up to the sheriff to let it grow. Brody's decision was a reluctant turning point, a step toward righting a long-standing wrong. That night, back at their lean-to on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Elias Thorne explained Sheriff Brody's decision to Elara Vance. The fire crackled softly between them, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Elias told her that standing before the whole town, challenging Jeb Stone directly, would draw all eyes on them. It would make them targets, not just for Jeb, but for any lingering judgment from the community. Elara listened, her hand instinctively going to Silas Vance's sleeping form. Fear for her brother, a cold knot in her stomach, mingled with the fervent desire for justice. She looked at Elias, her eyes wide with apprehension. She expressed her deep fear for Silas, for the dangers they would face, for the potential backlash from those who still believed the worst about them. She asked if it was truly worth the risk, if they could not find some other way to secure their claim. Elias understood her hesitation. He knew the cost of standing against a powerful man like Jeb Stone, especially in a town where he held sway. But he also knew the cost of not fighting, the slow erosion of spirit that came from living under injustice. He looked at the small wooden eagle, tied securely to a rawhide thong near the fire, its smooth wood catching the firelight. He knew what it felt like to retreat, to live in the shadows of a past tragedy, and he knew it was no way to live. Elara then straightened her shoulders, her fear hardening into resolve. She told Elias that her family had lost everything once, and she would not let it happen again. She said she wanted to fight for what was right, for her parents' memory, for Silas's future. Elias saw the fire in her eyes, the same fierce determination that had kept her alive in the blizzard. He reached out and took her hand, his grasp firm and reassuring. He promised her he would protect them, no matter what came. He said they would face it together. Their commitment to each other, forged in hardship, now stood ready for the public test, a united front against the storm ahead. The Willow Creek Town Hall buzzed with an unusual energy that afternoon. Word had spread of Sheriff Brody's unexpected meeting, and a crowd of townspeople gathered, curiosity overriding their usual reluctance to involve themselves in disputes. Elias Thorne stood at the back, his hand resting on Elara Vance's shoulder, Silas Vance clutching Elara's other hand. Elara wore a simple, clean dress, her hair neatly braided, her face pale but resolute. Jeb Stone stood near the front, flanked by two of his rough men, his sneering defiance a stark challenge to the assembly. He exchanged a contemptuous glance with Elias, a silent battle already underway. Sheriff Brody rapped his gavel for order, his voice firm as he announced the purpose of the meeting. To settle the long-standing dispute over the Vance family's mining claim, he called Elara Vance forward. Elias gave her a quiet nod, a silent message of strength. Elara took a deep breath, her eyes sweeping across the judgmental and curious faces of the townspeople. She looked at Jeb Stone, and for the first time, she did not flinch. Her voice, though soft at first, gained power with each word. She recounted her family's story, the hard work of her parents, their honest claim to the land. She spoke of the hope and future they had envisioned on their piece of ground. She spoke of Jeb Stone's relentless harassment, the threats, the attempts to drive them off. She described the raid that had shattered their lives and left Silas wounded, his small head still bearing the scar. She held up Old Man Hemlock's map, its faded lines a stark contrast to the fresh lies of Jeb Stone. Her words painted a vivid picture of injustice, her voice filled with a newfound courage that resonated through the crowded hall. Jeb Stone began to bluster, shouting denials, calling her a liar and a claim jumper, but his words were drowned out by Elara's unwavering truth. She stood tall, her gaze steady, her truth unwavering. Elias Thorne watched her, a profound sense of pride swelling in his chest. She was not just speaking for herself, but for all who had been silenced. Elara's voice, once a whisper in the storm, now commanded the attention of the entire town. Her courage turned the tide, not with force, but with the undeniable power of a truth bravely spoken. A hush fell over the Willow Creek town hall as Old Man Hemlock, his movements slow and deliberate, shuffled forward. He carried his own copy of the faded map. His presence, a testament to his honesty, drew all eyes. He confirmed Elara Vance's story. His voice, raspy but clear, recounted seeing Jeb Stone's men repeatedly ride to the Vance claim, their threats a common sight. He said he had warned Elara's parents to be careful. He had seen the fear in their eyes. Hemlock then produced his map, placing it on the table beside Elara's. The boundaries matched, the dates clear, predating Jeb Stone's fraudulent filing by several years. Jeb Stone's face grew red with fury, his denials sputtering and losing their force. He called Hemlock a senile old fool, a liar, but his words lacked conviction. The townspeople murmured, their initial skepticism giving way to a dawning realization. Many had known Jeb Stone was a ruthless man, but few had dared to challenge him. Now, with Hemlock's steady testimony and the undeniable evidence of the map, the truth began to solidify in their minds. Sheriff Brody, his expression grim, examined both maps closely. He looked at Jeb Stone, his jaw tight. The evidence was irrefutable. Brody's gaze hardened, reflecting the town's growing understanding of Jeb's deceit. Old Man Hemlock's testimony was a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of understanding through the room. The quiet wisdom of the mountain had spoken, and the town could no longer deny the truth. Enraged, Jeb Stone lunged forward, a guttural snarl tearing from his throat, his hand reaching for Elara Vance. His intention was clear, to silence her, to crush her truth with brute force. Elias Thorne moved like a mountain cat, a blur of motion. He stepped between Jeb Stone and Elara, shielding her and Silas Vance from the attack. Elias met Jeb's charge with a powerful shove, sending the larger man stumbling backward. Jeb's two henchmen started forward, their hands going to their own pistols. The town hall erupted into shouts and gasps as the confrontation turned violent. Sheriff Brody, galvanized by Jeb Stone's desperate violence, barked commands. He drew his own pistol, pointing it at Jeb's men, his voice cracking with authority. A few brave townspeople, witnessing Elias's swift defense and Jeb's blatant aggression, stepped forward to assist the sheriff. They had seen enough. The tide of public opinion had turned, and now their collective courage found its voice. A short, fierce struggle ensued. Jeb Stone fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered by Elias Thorne and the newly emboldened townsfolk. Elias held his ground, his eyes fixed on Jeb, his posture a testament to his unwavering will to protect Elara and Silas. Jeb Stone and his men were quickly subdued, their weapons confiscated. Sheriff Brody clamped handcuffs on Jeb Stone's wrists, his face grim with satisfaction. The reign of intimidation, the fear Jeb Stone had cast over Willow Creek, was finally broken. Elias Thorne stood tall, his breathing steady, Elara and Silas safe behind him. He had faced down the blizzard, the beasts of the wild, and now the human menace, all for the sake of this small chosen family. The raw power of Jeb Stone's fury had met the unshakable resolve of a man who found a new reason to fight. The silence that followed was not of fear, but of a justice finally realized. Sheriff Brody, his voice ringing with authority, declared Jeb Stone officially under arrest, along with his two accomplices. He then turned to the assembly, announcing that Elara Vance's family claim was legally restored, based on the evidence presented in the testimony of Old Man Hemlock. A wave of relief washed over the Willow Creek Town Hall. The townspeople who had witnessed Elias Thorne's courage and Elara Vance's resilience now approached them, their previous coldness replaced with cautious apologies and respect. Mr. Abernathy, the store owner, even offered a mumbled apology, his face uncharacteristically soft, a subtle nod to Elias Thorne. A few families who had previously avoided Elara now offered genuine offers of help, suggesting they would assist in repairing the old Vance cabin on the claim. Elias felt a loosening in his chest, a sense of vindication not just for Elara, but for himself and Silas Vance as well. They were no longer outcasts. They had earned their place through truth and courage. Elara, tears welling in her eyes, squeezed Silas's hand. She looked at Elias, her gratitude profound and unspoken, a promise of a future together. The long shadow of injustice had finally lifted, replaced by the tentative embrace of a community that had seen its own failings and chosen a better path. Elias Thorne knew this acceptance was hard-won, but it was real. The town's verdict echoed not just legal truth, but a deeper shift in its own heart. The long winter of judgment had finally begun to thaw. Later that afternoon, back at their lean-to on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Elias Thorne and Elara Vance sat together, Silas Vance sleeping soundly between them. The setting sun painted the mountains in hues of gold and pink. Elias suggested they had a choice now. They could return to the isolated cabin in the high mountains, a place of safety but also solitude, or they could stay in town, work Elara's restored claim, and try to build a life here. He watched her, knowing the weight of the decision. He knew his own heart had changed. The thought of returning to his lonely existence, even with its quiet peace, felt hollow now. Elara looked at Silas, then at Elias, her gaze filled with a quiet strength. She said she wanted to stay. She wanted to rebuild her family's claim, to honor her parents, to build a life where they belonged, not just survived. She said she wanted Silas to grow up knowing people, knowing community, even with all its imperfections. Elias felt a surge of warmth, a profound joy he had not known in years. For the first time, he truly envisioned a future not alone, but with them, with Elara and Silas, building something real and lasting on this land. The wooden eagle hanging from his neck now felt lighter, its weight no longer just grief, but possibility. The choice they made was not merely about location, but about the very shape of their lives. It was a promise to each other, whispered under the vast mountain sky, to build a future together. A few weeks later, the Vance family claim, now truly theirs, hummed with quiet industry. Elias Thorne and Elara Vance worked side by side, repairing the small cabin. Its roof, once sagging, now stood firm. Its walls, once riddled with holes, were patched and chinked. Silas Vance, now fully recovered and filled with childlike energy, helped where he could, fetching tools or carrying small pieces of wood. His laughter, once a rare sound, now echoed freely across the small homestead. The land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, unfurling new green shoots after the long winter, ready for their touch. The wooden eagle, Elias's treasured possession, found a new and prominent place. Elias carefully hung it above their newly built hearth, where the fire crackled warmly. It was no longer tucked away in his pocket, a secret comfort for a solitary man. It was openly displayed, a symbol for all to see. Elias looked at it, understanding that the promise embedded in its carved wings was not just for the past, not just a memory of loss. It was for the future they were building, a future of protection, of new beginnings, of a family chosen and fought for. It represented the spirit of his late wife, but also the enduring spirit of life that Elara Vance and Silas Vance had brought back to him, breathing new life into his own existence. The eagle, once a silent witness to Elias's grief, now watched over a hearth filled with life. Its meaning had shifted, transformed from a symbol of absence to a powerful emblem of presence and enduring love. Willow Creek bustled with a gentle warmth on a sunny Sunday morning. Elias Thorne, Elara Vance, and Silas Vance walked together to the community gathering, no longer outcasts. The path felt different now, less fraught with invisible barriers. Sheriff Brody nodded with genuine respect, his stern face softening into a rare smile. Old Man Hemlock, sitting on a bench, offered a small, knowing grin and a tip of his hat. Dr. Caldwell, gruff as ever, offered a kind word about Silas's full recovery, a subtle acknowledgement of Elias Thorne's own healing skills. Though some townspeople still held reservations, their faces tight with lingering prejudice, the warmth of the majority was palpable. Children ran freely with Silas, their laughter mingling in the spring air as they chased each other through the tall grass. Other women chatted easily with Elara, their conversations flowing with the rhythm of shared lives, discussing recipes and garden plans. Elias watched it all, a quiet satisfaction settling deep in his soul. It was a hard-won victory, not just of land, but of acceptance, of belonging. They had carved out their space, not just in the wilderness, but in the heart of this community, with courage and unwavering truth. The air around them vibrated with a hard-won acceptance, a testament to the power of truth and the quiet strength of a chosen family. Tonight the house remembered how to breathe. The land around their new cabin, Elara Vance's rightful claim, stretched out under a sunny afternoon sky. Elias Thorne, his movements fluid and patient, taught Silas Vance how to identify edible plants, their names whispered like secrets of the earth. He showed the boy how to track small animals, pointing out faint prints in the soft earth, explaining the habits of the forest creatures. Silas, no longer withdrawn or fearful, laughed and learned eagerly, soaking up Elias's wisdom like a thirsty sponge. He asked endless questions, his bright eyes full of curiosity and wonder, his small hands eager to mimic Elias's actions. Elias realized he was not just teaching survival skills, he was passing on a way of life, a deep respect for the land, a legacy that once he thought would die with him, a part of himself he had kept guarded for so long. He watched Silas's small hands carefully examining a wild berry, his face alight with discovery, and felt a profound connection. This boy, once a stranger, now felt like his own son, a vessel for all the knowledge and love he still held. Elara watched them from the cabin doorway, a gentle smile on her face, witnessing the quiet bond that had blossomed between the two. The mountain man, once a solitary figure, was now a loving mentor, building a bridge to a future he had never dared to imagine. Elias leaned down, pointing to a distant hawk circling above the peaks. He explained its patient hunt, its keen eyes, its freedom. Silas looked up, his face mirroring the hawk's quiet strength, ready to learn more. He was ready for the life that lay before him, a life built on solid ground and fierce love. A year had passed since the snows melted, and the truth about Jeb Stone unfolded in the town hall. The small cabin on Elara Vance's claim, once a forgotten shell, now stood sturdy and warm, a testament to relentless effort and shared purpose. Elias Thorne watched the smoke curl lazily from his chimney, a sight that still brought a quiet satisfaction to his soul. Every log had been reinforced, every gap chinked, and a new solid door kept the mountain chill at bay. The cabin was no longer merely a shelter against the elements, but a beacon of warmth, a true home built with their own hands and a growing, fierce love. Spring had returned twice, bringing with it a vibrant, thriving garden behind the cabin. Elias and Elara had worked side by side, turning the stubborn mountain soil into rich earth. Rows of beans climbed poles, squash vines sprawled generously, and the first red tomatoes swelled under the summer sun. Its bounty reflected their tireless efforts, a promise of sustenance and stability for the coming winter. Elara often hummed as she tended the plants, a sound that Elias had come to cherish more than the silence he once sought. Silas Vance, no longer a pale and frightened boy, darted through the tall grass nearby, his laughter echoing across the land. He was healthy, vibrant, and filled with a boundless energy that warmed Elias's heart. Elias watched Silas practicing with a small, whittled bow, an eager student of the wilderness skills Elias had begun to teach him. The boy's joyful shouts were a melody Elias had never known he craved, a stark contrast to the hollow quiet that had filled his life for so many years. He understood that this thriving scene, the sturdy home, the abundant garden, and the boy's unburdened laughter was the physical manifestation of the family they had chosen to build, piece by hard-won piece. Inside the cabin's kitchen, the next morning, Elara moved with a newfound confidence, her hands competent and sure as she worked the dough. The scent of yeast and flour filled the air, a homely fragrance Elias had come to associate with comfort and belonging. She skillfully kneaded the bread, her movements fluid, a far cry from the tentative girl he had found nearly frozen in the snow. She had grown into a strong, capable woman, her resilience forged in hardship and her spirit unbent by sorrow. Elara spoke of plans for expanding their garden, perhaps adding a small patch of corn next spring. She talked about trading their surplus produce in Willow Creek, her mind already calculating yields and market days. Elias listened, his gaze steady, filled with pride at the capable woman she had become. Her ideas were practical, her vision clear, and her determination mirrored his own quiet resolve. She had not just survived, she had learned to thrive, becoming an indispensable partner in their shared life. Elias offered his thoughts on crop rotation, his comments supportive and measured. Their conversations were no longer terse exchanges about immediate survival, but discussions of shared dreams and a future they were actively shaping together. He saw the fire in her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture, and knew he had found not just a companion, but an equal. This was a deeper warmth than any hearth fire could provide, a steady, enduring light that chased away the lingering shadows of his past solitude. As the sun began its slow descent one evening, painting the western sky with hues of orange and purple, Elias Thorne led Elara Vance up a winding path to a scenic overlook on the mountain. This was a place he had often sought in his years of solitude, a high vantage point where the vastness of the world seemed to put his own grief into perspective. Now, with Elara by his side, the mountain felt different, less lonely, more a part of their shared journey. The crisp air held the promise of evening, and the distant calls of mountain birds echoed softly. He stopped at a precipice overlooking the sprawling valleys below, the land stretching out like a dream. Elias turned to Elara, his heart hammering against his ribs, a sensation both strange and exhilarating. He had faced blizzards and desperados with less trepidation than he felt in this moment. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled a small, simple, hand-carved ring from his pocket. It was made of mountain mahogany inlaid with a tiny piece of turquoise he had found in a creek bed, a piece of the land itself. Elias looked into her eyes, which reflected the deepening colors of the sunset. He told her she brought light back into his world, that she and Silas had taught him how to live again, how to hope. He told her he wanted to share every sunrise and every challenge with her as her husband. Elara's breath caught, tears shimmering in her eyes as she looked from the simple ring to Elias's earnest face. She whispered his name, a sound filled with profound emotion, and then, with a joyful sob, she accepted his heartfelt proposal. Their embrace beneath the vast painted sky was a silent vow, sealing their future together, a promise as enduring as the mountains surrounding them. Months later, Willow Creek buzzed with the lively energy of a community picnic, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and cooking meat. Elias Thorne, Elara Vance, and Silas Vance arrived together, no longer treated as outcasts or curiosities, but as integral parts of the town. The transformation was not sudden or absolute, but a gradual thawing, earned through their courage and integrity. Bright sunshine filtered through the trees, illuminating smiling faces in bustling activity. Sheriff Brody, a stern but fair man, approached with a genuine smile and a firm handshake for Elias, a silent acknowledgement of their shared past and a mutual respect forged in crisis. Dr. Caldwell, less gruff than before, nodded kindly to Elara, praising Silas's continued good health. Old man Hemlock, ever quiet, offered a rare, knowing smile, a testament to the truth he had helped reveal. Elias felt a deep satisfaction, a quiet warmth spreading through him. Children played freely with Silas, their laughter blending together as they chased a rolling hoop. Other women chatted easily with Elara, sharing recipes and gossip, their previous reservations replaced by a shared sense of community. Not every face was warm, a few still kept their distance, But the pervasive chill of judgment had been replaced by a widespread quiet acceptance. It was a hard-won victory, a testament to the fact that truth and persistence could, over time, mend even the deepest fractures of prejudice. Elias saw the joy on Elara's face, the uninhibited happiness of Silas, and knew this was a peace he would defend fiercely. One quiet evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the peaks, Silas Vance, now a skilled carver, presented Elias Thorne with a gift. The boy's hands, once unsteady from injury, had grown nimble and sure. He held out a small wooden eagle, a proud copy of the one Elias always kept in his pocket. Silas had spent weeks meticulously carving it, his brow furrowed in concentration, echoing the focused intensity Elias often displayed when working with wood. The boy's face was beaming, his eyes alight with anticipation. Elias took the small carving, his fingers tracing its smooth contours. He pulled his own eagle from his pocket, holding the two side by side. Silas's eagle was a little rougher, the lines less refined, but the spirit of the bird, its proud posture, and its piercing gaze were undeniable. Elias felt the full circle of his journey in that moment, from the deep loss that had been tied to the original eagle, to the renewed hope and purpose that Silas now represented. The grief for his lost son, though still present, no longer defined the carving. He realized the eagle no longer just symbolized a past wound, a quiet sorrow. It had transformed. It now represented the enduring spirit of life, the fierce protection of family, and the profound courage to choose love again, even after heartbreak. Elias looked at Elara, who watched with a gentle smile, and then back at Silas, his heart swelling with a gratitude that went beyond words. The eagle, once a solitary reminder of what was gone, was now a powerful emblem of what was found, a symbol of their new chosen life. Outside their cabin, as dusk deepened and the first stars began to prick the vast Montana sky, Elias Thorne, Elara Vance, and Silas Vance stood together. The mountain air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The cabin glowed with lamplight, a warm, inviting beacon against the deepening blue, a place of safety and belonging. It was a stark contrast to the blizzard-swept wilderness where their story had begun, a testament to how far they had traveled, not just across the land, but within their own hearts. Elias pulled Elara close, her head resting against his shoulder. Silas nestled between them, a small hand finding Elias's, then Elara's. The silence was not empty, but full, rich with the quiet hum of the crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves, a symphony of peace. This was a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by fierce love, and by the shared understanding of what it meant to survive, to fight, and to build something beautiful from the ruins of the past. Elias looked up at the endless expanse of stars, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had found what he thought was lost forever. He had found his home. Tonight the house remembered how to breathe, and its breath was shared. A distant owl called from the forest, a soft sound carried on the night wind. A lullaby for a family finally at peace.